Okay, welcome everybody. Technology has us be able to be in different places around the country, around the world. Andrew just said he's in Neisner, and I'm up in the Kruger Park. But somehow technology still allows us to do what we need to do. So let's just go on a journey about Chanukah, which begins tomorrow night. Tomorrow night will be the lighting of the first candle. And for those in Johannesburg, we're having a drive-in celebration at Great Park. We're going to have the lighting outside. Everyone stays in their cars, not have to worry about COVID. It's a drive-in, so you stay in your car and we'll make the brachot, we'll have some music, and we'll hand out some goodies. Also happening, I think for the first time, I don't know if it's ever happened before, we have a wonderful innovation at Great Park this year, and that we're going to be lighting up a searchlight, which goes 2 kilometers into the air. First night we'll have 1, and the second night we'll have 2, all the way until the 8th night we'll have 8. And hopefully the lights of Chanukah will be seen not only on the highway, but way into the different neighborhoods. I've tested the light. It goes 2 kilometers. I don't know if Ellen, you'll hear it all the way in Linksfield. You'll see it in Linksfield, but you'll see it in the vicinity of the Great Park for sure. It's a huge light that's going to go up, and may this year, which has been associated with difficulties and darkness, be supplanted by the light of Chanukah and the light of Torah. Please God. So I'm going to begin by going through a bit of a history of Chanukah before we take some of the messages that we can derive from it. And let's just go through an initial slide of what is happening. So looking at the dates of Chanukah, we're often not sure when Purim happened and when Chanukah happened in the storyline. Purim was in the first temple, but the first temple was destroyed about 400 years before the Common Era. And then a few years later, we started dominance of the Greek Empire. And the Greek Empire came in with a whole lot of enlightenment. There was architecture, and there was knowledge, and there was a lot of new thinking that was very enticing to the world. And initially, there was a series of Antiochuses. Initially, they began enticing the Jewish people and enticing all people in their empire to embrace the newfound ideologies and thoughts and philosophies and this grand new thinking which revolutionized the whole world, to embrace it. So that was the initial process, was to try and get us. And after a few of these Antiochuses, we had Antiochus IV, and he desecrates the temple. This is when the story of Chanukah is happening, about 168 before the Common Era. And he goes in. By this stage, there was forced persuasion to embrace the Greek philosophy. No longer was it enticing us because they were wanting us to embrace it, but they were forcing us. They came up with many rules, which we're going to go through it. And then 2 years later, we have Yehuda Maccabi purifies, dedicates the temple. The whole story of Chanukah takes place just before the Common Era. There's the fight, we'll soon go through it, with the sons of the Maccabi sons. There were 5 of them. And eventually they win, and the miracle takes place. So this is just placing the whole story of Chanukah into its context. The destruction of the temple was to happen approximately 200 years later. So the Hasmonean kingdom didn't last very long. It actually lasted about 200 years. And then came the desecration of the second temple by Rome, and eventually we were dispersed amongst all the nations of the world. Till today, we're davening and we're praying for the building of the third temple, which will be eternal with the coming of Mashiach. May that happen very quickly. So let's just go through some of the historical points of Chanukah. We said already that it's happening in the second temple era. They tried to Hellenize the Jewish people. The Hellenization of the Jews was an attempt to elevate them, in their opinion, to bring us to new philosophies, to new ideologies and thoughts, and to leave behind the old-fashioned, antiquated Torah and replace it by new thinking. And many Jews succumbed. This happens in a world that embraces the Jewish people and says, come, you'll share, you'll be involved with all of our learning and philosophy, and many Jews embraced it. They began to trivialize the study of Torah. It's old-fashioned. We don't need the Torah. We don't have to listen to mitzvot. We can follow our new ideology. But by the time it came to Antiochus Epiphanes, who was the 4th Antiochus, now they were forcing Hellenization, and now they were very strict in forbidding Torah study, Shabbat learning, fulfillment of Shabbat, keeping Brit Milah and the Jewish calendar, which was vital to the Jewish people because that stipulated the various festivals that were to take place. And now, if the Jewish people were unable to follow a Jewish calendar, all of their Jewish festivals would fall apart. So in response to these new decrees, draconian decrees that forced the Jewish people not to be able to live their Jewish lifestyle, a revolt begins in 167 before the Common Era, begins in Modi'in. We know where that is today. It's between Yerushalayim and Tel Aviv, a very modern, beautiful city. It's in that region that this revolt began. But they were forced to sacrifice a pig in the temple. So you can imagine the humiliation of the Jewish people, a chaza, a pig, and in the temple, and to bring it in honor of the Greek god. Matisyahu is the son of Yochanan Kohen Gadol, who was a very famous Yochanan Kohen Gadol. We speak about him on Yom Kippur. So he kills the messenger that came to inform the Jewish people that they had to bring a chaza, a pig, in the temple as a dedication to the gods of Greece. So Matisyahu now gathers his 5 sons, Yonatan, Shimon, Yehuda, Elazar, and Yochanan, is named after his Zayda, rallies the forces on the 25th day of Kislev. The Maccabees recapture the temple, purify it, and rededicate it. That is the war story of Chanukah. So what does the word Chanukah actually mean? The word Chanukah means from the Hebrew word chanu, which means they rested. Ka stands for chaf hey. Chanukah, chaf hey. They rested from the war on the 25th day of Kislev in the year 164 BCE. So this is the beginning of Chanukah, celebrated because they rested from the war which they miraculously won. A totally different derivation of the word Chanukah comes from the word chinuch, which means to dedicate or to educate or to prepare for use. So this refers to an event that took place long before the whole story of Chanukah. We're going back to the tabernacle in the desert, Moshe Rabbeinu, which we read about in the Chumash. So it was completed, all the instructions to gather together the materials and to set up a sanctuary for Hashem, which is made up of gold and copper and silver and then all other the items that were involved. It was completed on the 25th day of Kislev in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, many hundreds of years, thousands of years before. Although they actually set it up on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, so that's when the actual setting up of the Mishkan took place, but the completion of all the parts thereof will happen on the 25th day of Kislev. So Chanukah has 2 derivations. The Chanukah history, the story that we know from Chanukah, which happens in 164 BCE, and there the word Chanukah means they rested on the 25th day of the month from the war which they had just won. Alternatively, the word Chanukah means to dedicate or to consecrate, and it goes back to the first sanctuary, before the second temple, before the first temple. The sanctuary in the desert, which was to be set up by Moshe Rabbeinu, was completed on the 25th day of Chanukah. 2 derivations of the word Chanukah. So now we're going back into the 8 days of celebration, and what is interesting and not so well known is that there are totally 2 different sources for the miracle of Chanukah. And the book of Maccabees, which incidentally was included, lahavdil, in the Catholic Bible as one of the holy books. It was canonized and included in their Bible. It was never included in the Jewish Bible. The book of the Maccabees does not appear in the Chaf Dalat Sifrei Kodesh. There are 24 holy books in our Tanakh, and one of them is not the book of Maccabees. So it was written at the time, and they're not actually sure who is the actual author of it, but this is the count, this is how the account of the events of Chanukah appears in the book of Maccabees. There was a miraculous victory of the few and the weak against the huge, mighty Greek armies. It's only talking about the war. And why would they keep 8 days of Chanukah? Watch this. It has nothing to do with the oil, which we're going to get to soon. It has to do with the fact that once they rededicated the sanctuary, they were able to celebrate, and they had missed out on the celebration of Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret, which is 8 days following Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and they made up that festival that they would have kept in the temple and couldn't because it was desecrated. They made up those 8 days by celebrating 8 days in the temple. What is interesting that the book of Maccabees makes no mention at all about the story of the oil. It is not mentioned at all. This is a military-based victory. We had to give thanks to God because we had won the battle, and we kept 8 days because we were replacing the 8 days we lost over Sukkot and Chanukah. What we do know much more readily is the story as it appears in Megillat Ta'anit, which our Talmud Shir recently learnt about many of the details of Megillat Ta'anit, which lists all of the special festivals instituted by the rabbis. Why is it in the tractate of Ta'anit, which talks about fast days? A whole separate subject, because there were certain times that you could not celebrate these festivals. You couldn't establish a fast day on one of these festivals. That's why it lists the festivals. But the whole story and account in Megillat Ta'anit appears in the Talmud Shabbat, in the Gemara Shabbos, and this is the account over there. They came into the temple, they couldn't find uncontaminated oil for the menorah. It would take 8 days to produce new oil. Miraculously, they found one cruse of undefiled oil, and it was only enough to burn 1 day, but it burned for 8 days. That's why we keep 8 days of Chanukah. Sound familiar? This is the storyline as we know it. So what's interesting is that we have two totally different accounts of Chanukah. Why? And why is it that Megillat Ta'anit, the Megillah of Chanukah, the account of the story from the book of Maccabees, was not canonized and was not included in our Tanakh? And what seems to be clear was that there was a bit of a concern that if it would be set up as a festival to celebrate the war, which we had many reasons to celebrate, it was absolutely a miracle that we could win against the mighty Greeks, that we would lose the spiritual dimension, that we would focus on our power and our strength, kochi v'otzem yadi, and we'd forget the godly dimension. So the Talmud emphasizes the miracle element, the miracle of the oil, which had nothing to do with human beings fighting and being strong. And that then was the focus of the religious celebration of Chanukah, and almost excluding in the whole storyline of the Talmud the battle, and the few beat the many. It is in the paragraph that we include in davening, al HANISSIM, that we have, and also Haneirot Halalu, that we include both. We speak about the war and we speak about the lights, because we definitely have to give thanks to Hashem for the miracle that He did in allowing us to win the battle, but it was the oil that the rabbis wanted to preserve. And the fulfillment of this festival is not by parades of military strength, but by the oil, because it was the oil that identified and specially focused on the miraculous involvement of Hashem. There was a concern that God would be lost in a self-glorifying celebration of Chanukah. And in fact, look what's happened over the years. There's a very nationalistic approach to Chanukah, which totally focuses on the victory. And then there's an interesting connection to Maccabi, which became the Maccabi Games, which is identifying who is the fittest, fastest, and who can jump the highest. All the things that mirror and parallel the Olympic Games, but from a Jewish cultural point of view. And that began to celebrate the physical strength, which if we don't include the other element of it, could be a tragedy. If we do include the other element of it, so then it's a celebration on both fronts. But the religious approach to Chanukah was not to highlight the power and the strength of the victory of the people, but from the words, Mi kamocha ba'elim Hashem, who is like you, Maccabi. So it's Mem Chaf Bet Yud. Hashem's name is spelled to the Yud. So Mi Maccabi stands for Mi kamocha ba'elim Hashem, which we sing on Friday night. Who is like you amongst all the gods of the world, Hashem? You stand supreme. It was about trust and faith in Hashem. And ultimately, the blend of it, which we find in davening, is to include the story of the war, but only in the context of the oil. Because the oil identifies why we're there. We're there because God performed a miracle for us, and that is our real focus. So moving on to some of the customs that relate to the festival of Chanukah. We have 8 days of celebration. We actually had 2 reasons why. We have rejoicing. We sing Hallel as we do on festivals. We kindle the menorah each night to publicize the miracle. This is an advantage of this miracle of Chanukah, of the mitzvah of Chanukah, over other commandments. Because other commandments is the fulfillment of Hashem's word. Yeah, we have an added dimension that we want to publicize Pirsuma Nisa. We want to publicize the miracle of Hashem. And that gives us an added dimension to the mitzvah of Chanukah. In addition to that, we have the custom of inserting HANISSIM in the Amidah, and during the benching, the grace after meal. So those are general customs of the festival of Chanukah. Now, let's just go through once we're talking about the means by which we celebrate, let's do the clear difference between Chanukah and Purim. Two festivals that speak about the victory of the Jewish people, and the one, Purim, is all about eating and having hamantashen and having the seudah and all of the beautiful things that relate to enhancing other people's lives by sending gifts, etc. But on Chanukah, whilst we say Hallel, the main focus is on the lighting of the menorah. Why? What was the difference between Purim and Chanukah? So on Purim, the attempt was, God forbid, to physically annihilate the Jewish people. And that's many times. I'm just going to mute everybody, if you can forgive me for doing so. Thank you. I'm going back to my screen. So we have the difference between Purim. So Purim, the attempt was to physically annihilate the Jewish people. In the story of Purim, it wouldn't have helped whatever our religious persuasion was. Haman didn't care whether we believed or we didn't believe. It was an extermination of the Jewish people that he intended, chas v'shalom. On Chanukah, there was no attempt to annihilate the Jewish people. There was no attempt to physically destroy us. What was the attempt? The attempt was to destroy our religious and moral values, to introduce paganism into the Jewish people, God forbid. And that is emphasized when we say that they attempted to cause us to forget the Torah. It doesn't say, lashkicham et haTorah, to cause them to forget the Torah. It says, lashkicham toratecha, Hashem, your Torah. Because the Greeks were ready to accept that there was a cultural richness that the Jewish people could add to their empire. And if the Jewish people would perform Torah and mitzvahs simply as a cultural activity, this is what you do. You eat gefilte fish and whatever, or cultural things. But they wanted to root out Toratecha, your Torah, Hashem, a godly Torah. If it was a cultural experience that could enrich the empire of the Greeks too. And they didn't mind. If you just gave up the God element of our religion, which is everything about it, but if we, God forbid, gave up that, then the Greeks were ready to live with us. They would tolerate us as equal citizens. They didn't mind us. They just didn't want us to believe in something that transcended human thought and connected to an infinite God. That they didn't want. And that's the reason why on Purim, the celebration is all about our physical well-being. It's about food, and it's about the meal, and it's about physically enhancing each other's life. Whereas Chanukah, which was a spiritual attempt to destroy the Jewish people spiritually, there we have a spiritual celebration by lighting the menorah, which is a godly mitzvah, not something that we personally have benefit from. In fact, we're not allowed to have benefit from the light of the menorah. And these two different trends that have confronted the Jewish people all the way from these ancient historical events till today. The history of the Jewish people is that, God forbid, either we have to contend with blatant anti-Semitism, where people want to destroy the Jewish people, the Holocaust, the pogroms, where they just wanted to annihilate the Jewish people, God forbid. And then there's the flip side of that, when the Jewish people are accepted and embraced and supposedly loved by the world, on their terms, but there we have the danger of assimilation. This is a voluntary assimilation of the Jewish people, where we are embraced with such kindness and warmth, we just need to forget that we are a godly people. And this is where so many millions of our Jewish people have fallen prey to the free world, to the Western civilization, to the United States of America, where people have the rights to perform and to do and to act as they please. and this has caused the Jew to be embraced. He's allowed to attend the club as a Jew, which he couldn't normally. He could go to the golf club. He's accepted as they tolerate having the Jews around them, and we feel very proud that we've been accepted. And a generation later, we already start having our children, God forbid, marry out of the faith, and many Jewish people are lost. Sometimes it's even equated in numbers, that the numbers that were lost to the Holocaust were lost through assimilation. That is how terribly detrimental the assimilation has been to the Jewish people. But these two titles of undoing the Jewish people, either by blatant anti-Semitism or by assimilation, was the difference between Purim and Chanukah. Purim wanted to destroy us physically, and Chanukah said, we'll embrace you as long as you let go. Let go of your Jewish roots, let go of all of the exciting things that are uniquely holy and connecting to God. That's what we're going to root out of Jewish culture. And that's what the Assyrian Greeks wanted to do. And that's what we've got to be careful of in our world today, that we don't, God forbid, allow ourselves to be caught up in it. A few more general customs. Yes, we said it's not all about the food, but there is always a Jewish celebration through food. So we eat potato latkes and we eat donuts. And the reason we do that is because anything that is made by oil, and there's a use of oil as a main ingredient, is Chanukah related, because of the festival of the oil, the miracle of the oil, and therefore we eat things that remind us of the oil. So it's a reminder. We give Chanukah gelt to our children. It's to be distinct from Lahavdil Be'elef Avdolas. This is a time and a season in the world where people give gifts, and God forbid that's also infiltrated into the Jewish thought and into the Jewish home. It's not about a tree, God forbid, and gifts. It's about Chanukah gelt. The kids made to feel happy and joyous and enhance the joy of the festival by giving them gifts of money. That was the Jewish custom. We have a dreidel, savivon, all being able to enjoy and to celebrate, and having the imagery of Nes Gadol Hayasham, the four letters found on the four sides of the dreidel. There's a custom not to work for half an hour while the candles burn, particularly the woman. Women suffered much more in the story of Chanukah, and therefore the miracle affected their lives even more than the men, and therefore women have a reason to celebrate by not working throughout the time that we have to have the Chanukah lights burning, which is half an hour after dark. Let's go through some of the inspirations that we can take from the story of Chanukah. The first journey I want to take us on, which is a subject we've dealt with before, and it's a subject in its own right, but very relevant to the story of Chanukah. How many branches are there in a menorah? So if we look at the menorah that was described in the books of the Torah, in the book of Leviticus, how the menorah would be made, in the book of Exodus, how the menorah would be made, it had 7 branches, one central branch, one central stem, out of which came 3 branches on the right side and 3 on the left side. So if we look at the symbol of the state of Israel today, it's a menorah, which dates back to that special menorah in the temple. The symbol has become very much associated with the Jewish people. 7-branched menorah. But Chanukah, we have 8. We even have a 9th, which is for the Shamash. So what is the difference between a 7-branched menorah and 8? So we've discussed many times the difference between the number 7 and the number 8 in our Jewish thinking. And in order to understand the significance of the number 7, let's go back one to the number 6. What's unique about the number 6? The number 6 represents all the facets of time, place, and person. In the mystic teachings, Olam, Shana, Nefesh, the 3 different dimensions of our world, which is we operate in time, we operate in place, and then there's the human faculties that utilize time and place. And each of them is made up of 6. That's why in space we have 3 dimensions, each of them having 2 directions, and that's why we have 6, the 6 sides of a dice. You have top and bottom, right and left, front and back, 6. You also have 6 facets in time. Hashem created the world, in the 6 days of creation. Hashem created the heaven and earth in 6 days. So we have the 6 days in time, 6 facets of time. In person, the Kabbalistic teaching talk about the attributes of our soul, which has 6 possible attributes: Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yisod, and Malchut. There are 6 faculties: Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yisod. So there's 6, and we therefore have 6 facets in place, in time, and in person. Then comes the number 7. What is the number 7 that makes it so associated with holiness? Because the number 7 introduces into all of these 6 facets a purpose and a meaning and a holiness. So therefore, the 6 days of the week celebrate the 6 dimensions of time, but it is the 7th day, Shabbat, that gives it its purpose and its meaning. Why are we here? Why do we have a first day of the week? Hayom Yom Rishon La Shabbat. It's the first day counting towards Shabbos, the second day counting towards Shabbos. The whole week builds up to Shabbos. And Minay Misbarchin Kula Yomin, the Shabbos then blesses the week that lies beyond. So Shabbos is what introduces into the 6 facets of time meaning and purpose. And the same thing happens in space. There's a 7th. And that is, if you take the time when we shake the lulav on Sukkot, we wave the lulav into all 6 directions, but on each waving, we bring it close to our heart, the inner space. You have 6 directions, but what's inside the box? The box has 6 sides, but what is the content? That's the 7th dimension. What's the meaning and the purpose and the reason that these 6 dimensions of space are here? So we have 6 dimensions of time, 6 dimensions of space, each enhanced by a 7th, which introduces purpose and meaning and something godly. And the same thing is in our human faculties. We have Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yisod, 6 different dimensions of our personality, the personality of our soul. But there's a 7th called Malchut, which is our communicative tool. It is the purpose and the goal of how we use the faculties of soul. The 7th always brings it to a purpose and to a meaning and to something holy. So that's the number 7. And in the Mishkan, in the sanctuary of Hashem, the menorah was made up of 7 branches, which represented the world being formed in 6 days and 6 dimensions and 6 faculties, but having the added dimension of the 7, which is holiness and purpose. But then comes the number 8. And the number 8 is not just the physical world enhanced by spiritual purpose, it transcends the world completely. The number 8 represents moving into a totally new realm. Even in musical notes, you have the 8th being the entrance into a new octave. You've moved into a different realm completely. And everything that relates to defying the natural order is associated with the number 8. And that's why the covenant of a Jew is on the 8th day of his life. Because a covenant means that you transcend the natural order. It's not a logical connection to God. It is a covenant. That means it transcends our logic and our thought process. And the festival of Chanukah, where you had not just an enhancement of the spiritual dimension, but a transcendence of it. Candle that's supposed to burn one day, burning 8 days, means that you have transcended and transformed the natural order. When one wildly undoes the natural order and transforms it into something completely different, which is holy, that is associated with the number 8. Number 8 will always appear when one is transcending. And the story of Chanukah is not just enhancing as Shabbat does to the week, enhances the week with a spiritual purpose. The number 8 represents a miracle, the transcendence, transforming a physical world, a finite world, into that which is infinite. Then we have an interesting debate in the Gemara between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, how one should light the candles. And Beis Shammai says that you should begin the first night with 8 candles, and the second night with 7, because the candle, as it burned, became less and less and less. So the last day of Chanukah, you light 1, according to Beis Shammai. Hillel is the one who says, no, first night you light 1, second night 2, the third night 3, 8th night 8. And he presents what becomes a dictum in the Talmud, and that is Ma'alin bekodesh ve'ein moridin. In holy things, you ascend, you don't descend. It's about aspiring to something higher. And that's what the flame of the candle represents. A flame always aspires to reach higher. If you take a flame and you attempt to force the flame downwards, it'll thereby be extinguished, because by definition a flame has to flicker upwards. It represents the ascent. And the first festival of Chanukah therefore reminds us, being that we follow the opinion of Hillel, that when it comes to holy things we should aspire, we shouldn't be satisfied. Why is it that so often in our physical pursuits we're never satisfied? If we're blessed with wealth, we want more, and we want much better. And we have no problems explaining to ourselves why it is we buy things that are much, much, much more than is functionally required. We could spend millions more than is actually required functionally on our homes and on our cars and on all of our assets. Why is it that when it comes to our physical things, we always want more? When it comes to our spiritual things, that's when we say, why are tefillin so expensive? Why? Okay, and these are questions that might need to be asked, but not result in us skimping on our spiritual needs and then being absolutely free with the pennies when it comes to our physical assets. So Hillel is telling us that when it comes to the nights of Chanukah, we ascend, we inspire, we are aspiring to reach for higher, and that's the whole process of Chanukah, adding in our holiness. Let's stop on the story of the undefiled oil. That's the miracle. The miracle was that they had enough oil that could only burn one night, and it would take 8 nights to prepare new oil. So with heavy hearts, they lit the flame of the oil that would only last for one night. But what actually happened before that was they discovered this cruse of oil. Now the Syrian Greeks didn't just destroy the oil. They defiled it, meaning they had no problem with oil. As we said before, you could have all the oil you want and you could light the oil. You could light the menorah with the oil. There's only one ingredient that they included, and that was that it has to be defiled. And they broke the seal that associated it with its spiritual preparation for the purpose of the Beit HaMikdash. So they broke the seal and left the oil. They didn't necessarily pour the oil out. They didn't mind oil. They didn't want godly oil. They didn't want oil associated with anything godly. So they broke the seal that showed that it was prepared for sanctification. So they search and they look through the mayhem. And between all of the broken destruction, the desecration of the temple, they find a cruse of oil. And Hasidus explains that this is a beautiful message for all of us in our own moments of desperation, when our world is caving in, when everything's falling apart, when we don't think we have the reserves and we have no ability to take on tomorrow. How are we going to handle life? And it's then we have to search for the hidden cruse of oil. Every single one of us has a part of ourselves that is godly, that is our inner core, that is our soul and our neshama. And if we can access that small cruse of oil that is within us, then when we access it and utilize it and allow it to guide our life, then suddenly what was impossible becomes possible. What is finite becomes infinite. We process the world not with our human strengths alone, but then we feel the presence of Hashem, the godly element of our life. And that is the story of the cruse of oil that was found there in the temple, and which has to be found in ourselves. And when we talk about these difficult days of COVID and all the whatever difficult challenges we go through, there has to be a belief that inside of ourselves, Hashem gave us the reserves. He gave us that pure inner core that is our soul, that if we can only access it and find a way of connecting to it, which might mean thinking about life and thinking about Hashem and thinking in our prayers and davening shachris with a few more thoughts about who we really are. If we can access that spiritual dimension of ourselves, we are transformed into different beings. It's almost natural that the oil burns for 8 days, because in that realm, nothing can get in the way. So that's the challenge for us even today, to access that inner core of ourselves, our inner soul, which is represented by that cruse of oil that was found. I'm not going to go through the whole HANISSIM, but I just want to highlight one word that is in the middle of the entire paragraph, which begins by talking about Chanukah, and then it gives the relevant order of events. You deliver the mighty into the hands of the weak and the many into the hands of the few. and the defiled people into the hands of the undefiled. So it goes through the whole storyline. And then it says, your sons entered the holy temple, and they cleaned the temple, and they purified the sanctuary. So it gives a chronology, one sentence after the other, following the order of how things unfolded in the festival of Chanukah. But at some point, it pauses and it uses the words VeAchar kach or VeAchar kain, depending on your nusach. And afterwards, this is what happened. But everything happened one after the other. It was always afterwards. After this came that, and after that came that, and after that came that. There was constantly an afterwards. Why suddenly here do we emphasize in the whole storyline, and afterwards, this is what happened next? Because this is the moment of transition. This is the transition between what Hashem did for us, the miracles that God did for us, and our response, what we did as a result of the miracle. And the word VeAchar kach says, it's all important to know, what do you do with what happens to you for good? This is the transition point. This is what God does. God did this for us, and he did that for us, and he gave, and he gave, and he gave, and he gave. VeAchar kach, but then what? As important as God's hand is in the miracle, because a miracle won't happen without Hashem, but as important in the significance of the miracle is the human response. What do we do with the miracle? When we go through a 6-day war and we see that Hashem delivered us, our enemies, into our hands and miraculously saved Am Yisrael, what does that bring about in us? Do we grow? Do we dedicate ourselves more, as many people did in the 60s, turned to their religion, became much, much more involved with Yahadut and with the fulfillment of Torah and mitzvahs? But many people didn't. Because a miracle is the marriage between what God did to us beyond what could ever be expected, and then the human response. If the human response is not there, it could be a wasted miracle. The miracle happened, and we forget, and we talk about parades of tanks, and we forget the element of godliness that was the core of all of that miracle that took place. So next time we say this paragraph, remember, when we get to the words VeAchar kain or VeAchar kach, that is the transition point. What do we do with the godly miracles that happen in our life? The gifts that Hashem gives us, even if they're not miracles, if they are the gifts of life, what do we do with them? When we finally count all of our assets and we're able to have our enemies delivered to us, and now we're standing on top of the world, we are no longer subjugated by the Greeks. What do we do next? VeAchar kach. VeAchar kach bo beitecha, they came into your house and they dedicated it and they cleaned it and they cleaned up the mess and they kindled the light. That was the response, and that's a vitally important ingredient in all of what Hashem does for us. This is a message generally about oil. The Talmud tells us that oil has two different properties, and the properties are not only different, they are opposite. The one is that shemen mefafea bakol, the Talmud tells us, that oil spreads into everything. So if you have, for example, something that is not kosher, touching something that is kosher, there's different ways that you can resolve it. If it was hot, if it was cold, if it was dry, if it was wet, there's different processes. Either just to rinse it in certain cases, some places you have to cut off the skin or the point where the two touched. But if there's oil involved, we say that's a problem. Because oil carries whatever touches into the nooks and crannies. Oil spreads. Oil greases itself into every corner. That's how we grease a motor car's engine, because oil is able to get into every nook and cranny. That's the one dimension of oil. The second dimension of oil, seemingly the opposite. When you mix oil and water together, as much as you shake it, the oil is going to rise to the top. And this is the complicated role that Hashem gave us, Jewish people, to play in this world. He wants us to be integrated into this world, to affect this world. He wants us to reach into every nook and cranny of this world and bring holiness and bring Kedusha there. He didn't want us to be isolated. But at the same time, there's the danger that if one's spreading oneself thin into every nook and cranny, we could easily forget who we are. And therefore, there's the other element of oil that says that you need to aspire to that which is higher. You need to be aloof and above the malaise. You got to realize that you have a mission that's more than what the world is presenting. And we need to do both at the same time. We need to stand above and involved. Not only involved, because then we could lose our mission. Not only above, because then we're going to live in ghettos, isolated from the world, and have no impact on society, which Hashem wanted us to have. So we need both. And it's hard, because they're two opposite tends. To stand higher and involved. That's a big challenge. But when we connect it to the right source, we're able to affect even the distant places of the world. And it is our responsibility to do that. The story of light. And we began by talking about the imagery of light and in dark times. So there's the famous story of the people that came to the rabbi and said, we have so much darkness in our house, we don't know how to get rid of the darkness. And the rabbi said to them, take a broom and go home and spend the next days sweeping out the darkness. At the end of the week, they came back to the rabbi and said, we've worked very hard, but there's been no impact. The darkness is still there. We can't sweep it out. So he said, I'll give you a different technique now. Leave the broom behind. Take a candle and light a flame. And ma'at or doche harbe choshech, a little bit of light can expel abundant, pervasive darkness. That is the Jewish method of expelling light. It's not to deal with the darkness, because you can get involved with that. You can get involved with step by step. How do we rid ourselves of this darkness and that darkness? And you're constantly involved with the darkness. We need to bring the light. We need to be inspired. We need to be connected to things that are illuminating the world through our Torah and through our mitzvah. It's not about dispelling the darkness as much as it is about kindling the light. And that's one message from Chanukah, that it is the flame, the small little flame, that is able to expel abundant darkness. The second element that we light, not only at night, to be able to light up the darkness, but we light at our windows. And there it has the imagery of a Jew being concerned, as we said before in the story of the oil, about what lies beyond our windows. We could have very happy lives in total isolation, but be unfulfilled Jews. That's not the purpose we were put here. We need to know what happens beyond our windows. We need to generate the light and ensure that our homes are filled with the radiance that Hashem wants it to be. But we must never be content with our homes being fulfilled if we forget those that lie beyond our windows. We need to make sure that the light reaches way beyond our home. We have to make sure that our kindness reaches beyond our families, that we care about the world, not only the Jewish people, but the entire world. We have a role to play to make this world a godly place. And the kindness that we extend, as the Rambam says, HANISSIM we have a responsibility to give charity not only to Jewish causes, maybe we have a priority there because it's home and it's family, but we have a responsibility to give to non-Jewish causes as well. We need to do chesed, do kindness to every human being. That is the role of the Jewish people. We light at our windows because we're concerned what lies beyond our windows. Here is a question that appears in most of the classic sources, and you could write a book of all the answers to this question. What is the question? Why do we celebrate 8 days of Chanukah? So we said because it took 8 days to make new oil. But for the first day, they had oil, right? So they only needed 7 days of miracle. So we should only be celebrating Chanukah for 7 days. The first day happened naturally. So there are 1,000 different answers to this and more answers to this question. One of the simple answers is because the first day it only burnt 1/8. So the first day didn't take all the oil. They could see the miracle happening in the first day because the first day it only burnt down in volume the amount that it should have burnt the entire cup, and only 1/8 was burnt. So the miracle could be seen on the first day as well, and therefore we celebrate the first day, the 8 days of Chanukah. But one of the explanations is that what do we say? Celebrate 7 days because that's when the miracle happened. The first day was a natural event. So the Chanukah is wanting to tell us we should not only celebrate the miraculous events that God intervenes and causes something supernatural to happen in our lives. What about the natural order? What about the fact that the sun rises in the east? It's not a miracle. It happens every day. It's considered a natural order to us. What about the fact that we can see and we can breathe and we can hear and we can do things? That's natural. Hashem owes it to me. We expect it. This is, we feel entitled to all of these things. That's the way the natural world or natural order of the world happens. So the story, according to one of the explanation, is we celebrate 8 days to say, yes, you have to celebrate the 7 days that were the miraculous order. Celebrate the first day as well, the day that oil burnt as oil burns, naturally. Remember Hashem for that too. Celebrate the natural things that happen in our lives. They too come from Hashem. In fact, the difference between a miracle and a natural event is not how hard or complicated it is for God. It's not any more or less complicated to do a miracle or a natural event in the realm of Hashem. The only difference between a miracle and a natural event is for us, how hard we have to work to realize that it is the hand of Hashem. If the sun rose one day in the west, it would be in the news, it would be crazy, everyone would be talking about it. We would realize that something supernatural happened. But we should also stop to think about the presence of Hashem when it rises in the east, as it does faithfully every single morning of our lives, because the natural order of this world is also from Hashem. So we celebrate the first day of Chanukah, which according to this opinion, the oil burnt naturally, and yet it was to be celebrated by us as well. I've hit the hour, 8 o'clock. So I thank everybody for joining. We had a very interesting collection of people, Andrew in Neisner and me in the Kruger National Park, seeing incredible sightings of Hashem's beautiful creatures in this world that he put here, and spending time, meaningful time with my family. And I'm just happy that notwithstanding being separated physically, this year has given us the opportunity to reach each other one way or another. So thank you for joining. Thank you for being here. And please God, we'll continue the journey ahead. Happy Chanukah. Light your own menorah, even if you come tomorrow night to Great Park, that does not fulfill the obligation. We have to light it in our home each night, the additional light of Chanukah, and watch the Johannesburg skyline. I don't know if you'll see it from Neisner, Andrew, but the skyline in Johannesburg should be able to identify that it's Chanukah. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you, Clifford. Thank you, Richard, for being here. Thank you, Lynette. Nice to see you here. Leah, good to see you. Sam, happy to see you here. Thank you.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you.